Hello, everyone. Welcome to Leading with Agility, the show that uses the world around us to explore how leadership can be inspired by agility. As always, I'm your host, Arif, and I'm joined by
TK, the producer of our signature podcast sound.
Thank you very much, TK. And thank you once again to all our listeners for joining us. So, TK, what are we discussing in today's episode?
Well, there's an interesting thing that's been going on literally for years. Essentially, what happens is there isn't a week where I can't see news regarding the fabled return to office. So people, companies getting to be pulled back, or workers getting to be pulled back from offices, from working mostly home or hybrid. And it's an interesting story because I can see companies introducing it. I can see companies that back the trend and don't introduce it. Some go 180. So that's an interesting topic, isn't it? I'm sure you can see this news yourself.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, obviously, since post-pandemic, this is, it's the new frontier for workplaces, right? And what type of workplaces, what type of work environments do employees, leaders want for the future? So it's an exciting, but also interesting time to be in, to witness all of this, isn't it?
And as I'm witnessing all that, it's actually quite frustrating, to be honest.
Right.
And we'll touch upon that in this episode. I can give you some examples, right? You're reading about Bob Iger in Disney.
Yeah.
Saying, as creators, we need to work in an office. And it's really important. It hasn't really worked out when people have been remote or hybrid so much. And, looking at the recent productions from Disney, you might see why. But on the other hand, some very successful person, Jensen Huang from NVIDIA with his famous leather jacket, one of the biggest companies now riding on the AI trend, he said, why would I bring people to the office? Because obviously I trust them and they're doing their work great. And one thing that you might have seen when it comes to this particular effect is our friends from the US, maybe from the military, they're like their TLA, so three-letter acronyms. And it's popularly called RTO, so return to office. So we might use it from time to time.
Return to office, yeah. Well, what do we over here in the UK? Is it more like hybrid working, or what's the common?
Some people try to say back to work, but it's obviously quite demeaning because it's not like people haven't worked or not working at home. And as a certain blonde prime minister would like to say that.
Yeah, he did.
So you can call it whatever you want, but I guess you know what we mean.
You know what we mean, right? So we're talking about return to office. Okay, great, excellent. So, where do we want to start the conversation, TK? What's important?
I personally thought that by 2024 we should have had it figured out.
Right.
It seems like we still don't, right? So
there's a surprise.
Well, it is, right? So my first point would be like, okay, let's look at the data. Let's look at what people think about it, and let's look what is being measured and what trends are there, right?
Yes.
So I've researched a couple of reports. There is a great, and we'll obviously have all that in the podcast notes, but there's the Flex report by a company Scoop, which is producing some great collaboration tools. We're not sponsored, but if you want to sponsor us, you know where to find us. There's also a cool report by LinkedIn, and they know a thing or two about work.
Yeah, they do.
So I have some interesting points there. For instance, by the end of 2024, they predict that 2/3 of the US companies, and even more in the UK, would have established hybrid policies and would have offered flexibility to their employees. So, one would say it's definitely going towards the direction of most companies, if not a very large majority, offering hybrid work.
So, I mean, what's the incentive for organizations and leaders maybe to offer it? Or is there something that they're missing in how they view the workplace and the working environment and maybe collaboration more broadly? What do you think is happening that's causing this kind of move and direction?
So another report which we looked at is the Flexible Working Index, and they have summarized it quite well.
Right. Okay.
And, I would love to hear your thoughts on that, which is, and, based on their data, they concluded that the more work from anywhere days a role offer,
Yeah.
the more job seekers will apply.
Oh, wow. Interesting. So
Yeah.
there's a direct connection between increased flexibility and a desire to want to work with that organization.
Essentially, people want
Yeah.
it, right? So you get more talent applying.
So it's a supply and demand issue, as simple as that.
Well, is it, right? Because, this is interesting. I remember way back when, maybe in 2022, so not that far ago, my wife works, in people management, and she's a people officer, and she was looking for some talent. And I said, just change the role to hybrid.
Yeah.
You're actually doing that. And, she hasn't been putting this particular tag on LinkedIn. And once she did, she got more candidates. And it's no lying involved. They actually do work hybrid.
Yeah.
So why not, right? It's not only a supply and demand point of view. I think there's much more going on. For instance,
Yeah.
and this is from one of the reports, mounting evidence showed that companies taking a flexible approach are able to dramatically outperform their competitors.
Interesting.
Which is an interesting one, right?
So I suppose what's interesting in terms of the data you're highlighting and the reports that you've been looking at, it goes directly in contrast with where you started with, where you mentioned, people like Bob Iger from Disney, who obviously want more of their employees back in the office. I think the quote I was reading, where he essentially said, in a creative business like ours, nothing can replace the ability to connect, observe, create, etc., and being physically together. So he's, I don't know, based on what data or evidence, or perhaps it's a belief he holds, that he thinks the physical connection of employees will impact the outputs and the value that the business can create.
It might, right? Well, there's the evidence, but on the other hand, every company has a different culture. So Disney is obviously a long-established creative company with long traditions. I would say they're pioneering in certain aspects of creativity.
Yeah,
we all know, obviously, and maybe. This is my hypothesis that their previous culture of collaboration is not well suited to a new way of work. Whereas actually a very technically focused design company like NVIDIA, even if they have to, they do, obviously, they're very innovative and they place the right bets, and, their technology is wonderful. Maybe their internal ways of communication and creative processes, because no doubt that these wonderful engineers are creative, and these wonderful product and marketing people are doing an amazing job if you look at their staggering growth.
Of course,
the evidence is there that it works. So I would say possibly that if your organizational communication culture has been built on a very strong foundation of personally working together in groups, or you've got people with a lot of experience and maybe a bit, dare I say, skeptical about these new ways of communication, this will be quite a difficult challenge for you, right? So maybe Disney is a more traditional company than NVIDIA is.
So are you suggesting that this working from home or flexible working requires a cultural shift? And if so, I mean, what are we talking about? What needs to change to make that more acceptable from a business?
So I think there's two. Okay, so we ourselves, Arif, we're a remote first company. So there we say we have some expertise. So let's, and we're Humble Associates, and hopefully you don't mind me telling a story. We have started on the 6th of April 2020.
Yeah.
Some of you might remember the global climate at this particular date. Don't dwell on it too much, because for many of you might not have been the present time, sadly.
Yeah.
And there's sad things that happened during that time. But most of us, and dare I say all of our listeners, lived through it one way or the other. So we knew that our company will have to be remote first. When we started. And I remember, we're also not sponsored, but I will say we have essentially built our whole communication culture around a few tools. One of them was Discord. And I think, I don't know what you think, Arif, but it was a good shot in the dark, basically hitting bullseye, because we're still using it to great effect, aren't we?
Yeah. I mean, it works as a remote-based comms tool. I mean, I think there are other uses for it that are more popular, like gaming and what have you. But for us and what
communication in gaming, Arif, communication in gaming, right? And that was it. That was because I was the one introducing it. Sorry to interrupt you there, but actually I introduced it because I knew we had to replicate a very maybe not competitive, but a very productive culture that's remote first, which is I at that time thought is online gaming. So I modeled our communication, or I suggested to you, and thankfully you all agreed with me, to model this communication culture through it. And of course we evolved it, but it has been serving us ever since. So we are remote native, but other companies aren't, and their communication processes aren't adapted. Plus, on the other hand, there is also the leadership aspect, isn't there?
Go on. So let's talk a bit about that. So like I said earlier, that was my question, which is, okay, so what you're saying, working practices, of course, different, tooling different, of course, all that needs to change.
Communication processes and tooling going hand to hand, right? And communication culture, yes.
So going to the leadership point, and I don't want to mention, well, not for the sake of repeating it, but we've talked about Bob, we've talked about the guys at NVIDIA.
Even the David Salomon, I think, from Goldman Sachs, he's been always like against remote work. The chief executive at BT, some people call them dinosaurs, but I definitely am empathetic towards them.
Yeah, there's some fear perhaps, or there's something they're missing, or there's something they're worrying about, and they're struggling to embrace this shift. So maybe the question is, what needs to change, or what needs to convince them that this shift is worthwhile making, perhaps? I don't know. Is that the right question to ask?
I will, I think, answer that through a prolonged answer with a TK story from my personal experience. So, Arif, years and years ago, I remember I was a portfolio or program manager before, and I've managed to win some big piece of work that required spinning up a couple of teams and I was working in one office which was mainly focused on being in direct contact with clients, and the majority of the people actually delivering the work were in different city, same country but different city, and the client was in a different country altogether, actually all across Europe. So I've been working remotely from an office from quite some time. But when this new project came along, the company board got interested because, significant profits and costs were involved, and it was good business. But we spun up the teams, or at least got people aligned to teams. And then they said to me, but TK, no, it can't just happen that you're in this one city and they're on the other city. You have to have another person that will be your lieutenant in the particular city when people do the work. And I was like, busy with other things. And I said yes to that. And I think it was quite a good choice. I have nothing wrong to say about the person I was given and how we collaborated and what came out of it. It was a good delivery. But the fact that because I was working remotely from an office from quite some time, thought that it's perfectly normal that people are in another city and I'm just working with them remotely, sometimes visiting them. And the people that were senior to me in the company said, no, this will never work. So for me, one thing was natural. For them, another thing altogether. So it's just where you start, right? And now going back to your question, Arif, a fundamental assumption was revealed. So when I was talking to a very senior person in the organization that told me in a very good faith spirit and, economical soundness of the decision that I need to have at that point a scrum master in this particular city when most of the teams sat, and maybe it was a good decision. He said, but how will you know sitting from another city that people actually do the job?
Wow, yeah.
Full stop, right? And that's the key. That's the assumption that people still have in their heads, and I believe that it's still alive and well.
Yeah, it's quite sad, and I guess that underpins a lot of nervousness or the kind of response you mentioned Goldman Sachs as well, and
lack of trust, right?
Lack of
you can't
yeah.
see them. How do you know they're working?
Yeah.
They might be, it's like,
well, you got what's compounded that is then you've got this kind of I don't know if arms race is the right word, but you had this whole situation where while this was going on during the pandemic, there were some of these banks enforcing that employees should use tools that would monitor their screen time and their mouse movements and things like that, right? And then employees took it upon themselves. Well, I'm going to buy this device that basically wobbles the mouse, so it looks like I'm there when I'm not there, because the trust is completely broken at that point. So
that's an interesting point. Let's come back to it later on in the episode, because I think it's a symptom of something greater. But you're absolutely right. And in fact, Arif, I've been subject of an experimental introduction of a similar tool in, I think, what was it, 20, not 20, but 19 or 2018. Right. So, this has been going on. You don't need a pandemic for people to lack trust. But the interesting thing is what's really needed, which is, in my mind, we all have different needs, and leaders need to pay attention to that.
Okay, so let's move on to that. And why is that important? Tell our listeners why leaders need to pay it. We have simple question. Let's start with that. Why is that important for leaders then?
Well, dare I say, I'll give you a demonstration, Arif.
Yeah.
How do you do your best work?
When I'm trusted, when I've got the creative space to do it, and if I've been set a clear goal, and I have all the tools available to me to kind of achieve it. Those are some things I can think of off the top of my head.
As simple as that, right?
Yeah.
But on the other hand, another TK story.
Oh, right,
because I spent some time working in finance.
Yes,
and it's,
you have.
I remember... Okay, so that's nothing wrong with what I did. So I worked in an investment bank, great team of people, great camaraderie, but it was actually quite loud. So we had an amazing working space. I had a wonderful view, Canary Wharf at the Thames, ships passing by. I could spend all day looking outside the window. So great. Really enjoyed it, but I found it difficult to do my best work, because it was just too busy, there was too much buzz, too noisy. So I sat with my noise-cancelling headphones, thank God for the technology. But what I did, and it was very interesting, is on Fridays, I actually took an excuse that I was working with a different team, and I worked from a different office. Yes, I still worked from an office, but I had to get away from the buzz of my own team of organizational consultants, because I just couldn't take it anymore. It's just too much. I was overstimulated and I couldn't do my best job. So I had to resort to coming early mornings, or actually escaping, or not even working from home, working from a different office building, to have a peace of mind to, as you said, do some creative work. So that and I know many people like that. It's not about any kind of neurodiversity. Some people just can be easily distracted, and they need some place to focus.
Right.
And I actually enjoyed the commute and everything. So that's one example, right? And I'm sure you know people like that yourself, Arif.
Yeah. No, exactly. Yeah. I used to like that kind of decompression downtime on the way home. And I mean, going into the office, yeah, maybe, but it was the going home bit. I think it was like, okay, it's that separation of that, half an hour, 40 minutes, 45 minutes, whatever it was. And then like, okay, walking in the door, right, that's it now. I can, and I think that's one thing I probably do miss now is because as you said earlier, we're remote first, and a lot of what we're doing is we're working from home with our business, and it's a completely different challenge, because it's just blurry now. So there is no clear separation. So so
you have to make one, right?
You have to make one.
This is one of the biggest problems with remote work for many people, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's a proactive effort you have to do. I struggle with it. I won't be afraid to admit that it's not easy. And then it affects, for those of you listening, I'm sure we've got families as well, like me. It's even harder, because there's expectations of, are you finishing at this time? Yeah, oh, I can't, I've got this to do, things like that. So yeah, it's a difficult one. Definitely.
It is a difficult one. There is obviously strategies. Another TK story, which maybe is too graphical for many people, but because it involves putting on
clean,
lycra.
TK.
Yeah, I'll keep it clean. So I'm cycling.
Oh yeah, okay.
So every morning, this
good.
offers me a great transition.
Nice.
So I'm definitely going to work. I even have my Neuro coffee.
I like this.
Not
So
sponsored, but they can sponsor me.
You go to work the long way, which is you leave home, you take a long ride and back again.
And sometimes my neighbors are being nosy. I was like, "You're going like this to work?" And I said, "Yes, I work in counterintelligence, and I will report to you." So I always have something I'm saying, because it's really surprising for some people that when it's like just before 8 or something, and I'm going to work with no backpack, nothing, just with my lycra. But it really helps me to get into the groove, right? And when it's summer, sometimes I even do another round in the afternoon.
Nice.
When it's light, or do some other activities, go out for a coffee. There's strategies. This podcast is not necessarily about that. I'm sure there's plenty of great articles, tips, and tools to help with that. But even though, and as you said, Arif, I have it figured out, or I'm sure many people have it better, but I think I'm reasonable. But I know some people.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell a story of a person I worked with, one of our clients in the publishing business. There was a very nice lady which really struggled. So she really struggled working at home. She didn't have a great environment, a great office setup at home. She felt incredibly lonely. It had a huge strain on her mental health.
Right.
To the point that I remember when the office mandates, or the government advice was like back and forth and so on, and no one really went to the office, but she was the only one there. Okay. Whenever it was physically possible, illegal to be in the office, she was there.
Wow.
And I remember talking with her and being really empathetic.
Yeah, what was the motivation for? Yeah, like what was she?
She just couldn't stand it sitting, alone at home.
Wow.
And I fully appreciate it, and I fully understand, right? And I had a lot of deep, and I could see her struggling. Yeah.
Just on that, I mean, I'm sure, like, I don't know, for listeners who are in the UK, especially, or Europe, you cost of living is going up, right? Mm-hmm. And there is a lot of in-work poverty, for example. That's a fact, as a reality. And so probably there may well be instances where employees prefer to be in the office because, okay, it's cheaper, yes, but that means they don't have to pay the electricity, the Wi-Fi, whatever it is, or the Wi-Fi is pretty fixed, but heating, there might be some snacks, food out of the office, whatever. It could be there could be additional things that they get that are not additional costs for them, and so they prefer to be in the office for that reason. I don't know.
Very important social problem, and I'm sure
there could be social issues like that,
right?
Unique. So I suppose your point, going back to where we started, TK, is that leaders need to obviously be aware of all this. So, are there any strategies or techniques that you're thinking of, or ideas around how leaders can be more attuned, or perhaps be more empathetic or aware of all of this, and design the right kind of working balance for their teams and employees? What do we think about that?
We've actually helped this company, and the way we did that is we did it through just product thinking. Okay, so let me unpack that, right?
Yeah,
so
you need to explain
essentially what you need to build a collaboration and communication framework from ground up.
Right.
Because we no one had to teach us how to communicate at the office, because it's the same way we communicate at school. But this is just completely different, this new way of communication. And there's new processes and tools involved. And as such, this is a product you're building. And you can use product development tools such as personas, such as empathy mapping, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
That would help you understand typical people's needs with different personas. So I just told you about 2.
Yeah.
There's more personas.
Yeah.
And you need to consider them. You need to know what, dare I say, clients or users you will have of set policy.
Yeah.
And make sure you understand these problems and design it accordingly for people's best needs.
Okay. So this is like real like consumer insight type work you might do, right? And so you're basically
But why wouldn't it be, right?
No,
Because
no.
the real people consuming your environment that you're building.
Of course, I totally agree with you. I'm just packaging it up in a way that maybe our listeners can get it, which is what you treat your own employees a bit like the consumers who buy your products, right? And do some empathetic based listening and understanding and testing your ideas out and getting the feedback and then iterating on it is what we're talking about here.
And there's more, right? Because this is just communication, collaboration culture. In fact, maybe it's a revolutionary thought, but your employees are consumers of your company culture. Right. And you, as a leader, are responsible for designing it in a way to make it effective for everyone.
Right. Okay.
So that's my tip, right? So my tip is don't just do what you think is right because of your preconceived notions, whatever they might be, is design it.
Yeah, it's a proactive effort is basically what we're saying.
Always is, right?
Yeah.
Nothing's for free. There's no free lunch. And don't think this is why there's a back and forth the time.
If you're thinking about, like you just mentioned there, preconceived ideas, we've covered that in a previous episode on leaders who are ideologues and what that might mean. So go back and listen to that episode if you want to know more about that. But
indeed, good luck, Arif. But I wanted just to say that this is the reason for the back and forth. That barely anyone is doing the proper work of designing the system. So they're leaving it to
best judgments?
Not only best judgments, but not to chance also, but to a constant tug of war between people's needs, which will plateau and establish onto something. Instead of like thinking and really designing it, they're just like, okay, let's do that and see 180 and this and that, and people are not coming, or people are doing this and this is happening, cliques form, and all these maybe sometimes toxic and unproductive and wasteful behavior is there because no one really sat down and tried to really have a product conversation or a service conversation about the culture of communication and collaboration they are designing for the modern and future way of work.
Yeah. Fascinating stuff. Yeah. Very, very important, isn't it, TK?
But that is only the surface, because after reading all these articles, Arif, I found out there's a deeper point. Because there was something that bothered me personally. I think we're having the wrong conversation here.
Okay.
Right? Even if you do the designing of the culture and so on, which barely anyone does, but that's okay. But if you read all these articles, what you will find out, which really amazes me, is there's this constant tug of war between two groups.
Yeah.
And I can't believe I'm saying that, but all these articles that I've read, and I've been reading them, and my eyes have been opening more and more, it's a tug of war between employers and employees.
Yeah.
I was like, what? Is this the conversation we're having? It's 2024, and is this going back to Theory X by Douglas McGregor, thinking about employees, so people actually doing the work in your organizations as, I don't know, literal enemies of leaders? Is this the conversation we're having in 2024? Because all the articles, or majority of the articles you will read, in a straight face, the article author will tell you, oh yes, the employees want more working from home, and the employers want to get them back to the office. I was like, dude, why on earth are we permitting ourselves to even think like that? This is, and it's like mainstream media and mainstream, papers and articles. I won't quote them, but it's just astonishing. Why do you think people still think like that, Arif?
I don't know. It's a good question. I mean, I think when you're describing that, to me, is I'm thinking of, okay, what are the interests that employers are trying to protect, right? Does it go back even further with the shareholder value stuff and bottom line and costs and all of this kind of stuff swirling around.
Not far enough, Arif.
No? Okay. It doesn't go there.
No, I think it goes back to the Industrial Revolution.
Oh, gosh. Okay.
And well, there you go. TK criticizing capitalism again. So sorry.
Yeah.
But, okay, no, I'm not, essentially.
Let's go through it. Yeah.
Let's go through it, right? Industrial Revolution, people were employed in factories.
Yeah.
You know, they came to cities, and the
Cogs in a machine.
Cogs in a machine, they were trained through Prussian-style education to be compliant factory workers, to move the mill. You've got Frederick Taylor and, Henry Ford optimizing it scientifically.
Right.
And, we moved to knowledge work, but our education system, making us meek corporate cogs in the machine, hasn't really changed.
Right.
So I would say, from a perspective of Frederick Taylor, and intelligent guy, and I'm sure he had his reasons for believing but quite early on, it was a good 100 years ago, it makes sense to talk about employers, so the thinking ones, and employees, the biobot cogs. But it's 2024. So and I understand why it's stuck, because one generation teaches another, right? There is some revolution, there is some change in thinking, but you know what really bothers me? There's so much talk about D&I, so much talk about being yourself, and yet same people are talking about employers and employees. This is just incredibly unsettling.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So, I mean, what does it mean now? We could bring it back fast forward 2024, where we are now. What do you think the conversation needs to be? I'm also going back to what we're here for in our podcast about obviously leading with agility and agile leadership as an idea. What kind of leadership stances are required in order to reduce this gap, reduce this kind of friction, and create the workplace that both employees and employers can benefit from? So
I think the first two principles of agile leadership, which is reflecting and having the North Star of value, are important here, because
being
agile leader
focused,
reflects. Yes.
Yeah.
And the agile leader reflects because they reflect on what they do and the impact they have.
Yeah.
And the impact for the mission they want to achieve. Now, they need, a leader that really reflects will understand that their organization is built out of people. And as such, it's their role to create the environment which suits people's needs. And I don't mean getting everyone and forcing them to work from home and not providing them any collaboration space. Not at all. What I mean by that is understanding all the personas and being able to do it correctly.
Yeah.
And whenever we are starting to say employers and employees, really stop and think. Really think if this is the conversation you want to have. Because when you're saying these things, and often when I work with clients, so there's some keywords which I hear them saying, which is, it's not necessarily evil to say that, but it might be a symptom of the underlying thinking you might have. So I always ask, okay, what do you mean employees and employers? Who are they?
Who's
in
the
your
they,
mind,
isn't
right?
It? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, it's easy to say, it rolls off the tongue very smoothly, but what you get is maybe you have the theory X in mind. Just maybe in the corner of your mind, you might not even be conscious about that, but it is there, and it is slowly chipping at you, impacting your decisions. Awful stuff. I mean, if you believe that, you believe that. I don't believe it's true. We can agree to disagree in terms of, the theory X people. But in the modern world, as we can see with the new generation, people need something else. If you've got millennials that now dominate the workforce and Gen Z, these people require different ways of working. And I think if you want to be ahead and utilize their wonderful creativity, energy, drive, and everything that the new generation brings forward, you can't use the 19th century kind of thinking.
No, you can't. That's an important lesson, isn't it? Or a reminder for leaders out
Reflection
there.
is optional, so is survival.
So survival. Amazing. Great stuff. Thank you, TK. So I don't know if there's anything more to add, but it seems like we're coming to a nice close on our episode today, isn't it? And I just thought, well, how do we summarize what we've been talking? I know you've reflected quite well on some of the things there around needs and perhaps employees and employers, sorry, and leaders really being attuned to the needs of their team members and the people they manage or line reports, and designing the right workplace that meets all those needs, right? That's the key kind of message. But I think there's something we've talked about, the whole industrial revolution kind of roots to some of this as well. The other, I think, lesson for me is there is this, goes back to a little bit about this ideological belief-based approach to managing people. There's a little bit of that, and as I said earlier, you can go back to a previous episode if you want to learn more about that or listen to our thoughts on that. But yeah, I think it's an interesting juncture we're in terms of remote work and returning to the office, and what goes next, what happens next. And I think more organizations like Flexer, who you mentioned, who are trying their best to educate and propagate this idea of flexible working and what benefits that can bring. I think the more organizations get on board with that message, the better we might be in terms of productivity, in terms of employee happiness, and benefits to organizations more broadly. Those are the things I'm thinking about, TK, after our discussion today. I don't know what closing.
And what I'm thinking is, if you're in a tug of war with your own organization, you're just spending energy on fighting instead of fulfilling your mission and adding value, doing what you're there to do.
Yeah, it's all about the collaboration bit again, isn't it? That's what we're all about as well. So yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much, TK. Thank you to our listeners for joining us for today's episode. We hope you've enjoyed listening to it, and as always, do check out the episode description for references,
all the materials,
and links to things that we've talked about today. That's all we've got time for. So we will hope to see you in our next episode. And in the meantime, please, as always, do like, rate, or subscribe if you haven't already to our podcast. And we'll see you again soon. Thank you very much.
Quite soon indeed. Bye bye.
Bye bye.